I'm reading a few excerpts from our new book, Foreigner. I call these readings Something Funny Happened in My Way to America. My uncle achieved some prominence as the mayor of our town, but his increased dependence on opium degraded his life and his potential. Sometimes he even used opium in his room in our house, and the smoke he exhaled drifted out of the window and inhaled by our ears, which would then stumble about the yard. When my mother or aunts tired of my hyperactivity, they would ask him to take me with him, and he would bring me to the opium den in the Red District of Abadan. Though I was only 10 years old, I took my school books, notebook, and a pen and sat by the doorway so that I could do my homework in the faint light coming in from the street. Eventually, the reading, the gloom, and the smoke would put me to sleep. I would awake hours later to find my uncle gone and would sleepily stumble out of the den and make my way to the front of the Taj Cinema and sit on its steps waiting for the bus to go home. Meanwhile, no one would miss me at home, figuring I had gone with one or another relative and was probably glad to have a break from my constant activity. A decision was made in 1953 when I was 11 years old to send me to a Baha'i school in Tehran to improve my behavior. The school name was House of Good Manner, Darul Tarbiyeh. Dr. Furutan was the Secretary of National Special Assembly as well as the General Director of the school. The school had been created by the National Assembly for Baha'i children whose parents had been martyrs or had left to help propagate the faith throughout the world. It was located near the National Center, which had a beautiful dome, extensive garden, a guest house, and many employers. Dr. Furutan went out of his way to try and channel my energy. He gave me a job of delivering correspondence around the National Center, and this kept me busy, though I would often glance at the correspondence in transit. One day I jumped in the fountain in the central courtyard. Dr. Furutan came out to try to get hold of me, but I ran to the other side of the pool. Despite the best effort of both Dr. Furutan and the school principal, I continued to cause trouble and found myself back in Abadan for the next school year, which is what I wanted all along. Nevertheless, I learned a great deal about the Baha'i faith from the reading I did at the Baha'i school, and some of other kids in the school went on to have distinguished lives of service. Everything that I knew about America I had learned from movies. America had streets where Gene Kelly danced and sang in the rain, and a street like Broadway lined with brightly lit movie houses and theaters. America was beautiful people in colorful, expensive clothing, smiling happily in large chrome-trimmed cars, going down a coastal highway in the sun, endlessly in love, casting their worries to the wind. At this point of my life, I would have already taken the entrance exam for the Iranian University and should have been looking forward to a life in medicine, engineering, law, or agriculture, which have led to a calmer, more predictable future. But I was 19 years old in 1961 and full of dreams, and I had just enough money to make them a possibility. Life in Iran under the welter of the mullahs, hatred and dictatorship of the Shah and his officer felt very restrictive. I was jealous of the people who could pursue their ambition. So I decided to go to America with money in my pocket from my mother's inheritance after the death of her father. I was ready to make my move. Using the basic English I had learned, I went to the American consulate. The embassy staff paid little attention to me. I must have seemed like some crazy Persian kid, when I uttered nonsense phrases like me, America, Einstein, von Braun, words I knew from my lessons. They gave me a few college applications, which I completed, opting to study nuclear engineering. Columbia University immediately rejected me, but Harvard sent me an acceptance letter. My family gathered in Tehran airport to see me off. I was fulfilling the educational and professional aspiration that my father had wished for, but had not been able to realize. Having been born in Near East and trapped by his limitation, my mother anxiously warned me against the temptation of the flesh in the radically liberal West, especially the wild woman and gambling. I settled down into a powerful wide-body Boeing bound for Rome, where I had to stop because I had a low-cost ticket. I had never eaten food on an airplane and had to follow the example of the passenger next to me to know how to do it. Looking out of the window and watching my Iranian homeland slip away under the plane, I felt melancholic, sensing that I would never see it again, though I had no concrete idea of what lays ahead. At the Rome airport, I found someone to help me to call Handavakar's Mr. Giaguri. After hailing a cab, I used my broken English to give the driver the address. Mr. Giaguri greeted me at his front door. He was a tall, regal man whose every gesture reflected his aristocratic upbringing. He was gracious toward me, so much so that I thought he must be mistaking me for a son of a renowned pioneer in Africa who had the same last name. That evening, Mr. Giaguri patiently taught me how to handle spaghetti properly. To this day, when I sit down over a plate of pasta and twirl the spaghetti precisely so that it wraps round the fork, I think of that distinguished Baha'i. Everything and everyone in Rome turned my head. The women were all Sophia Loren and the men Marcello Mastroianni. The city seemed to be nothing but sun and enthusiasm. Even the salesman hummed a tune and smiled with unbounded joy as he sold me shoes. The streets were overflowing with history, which I recognized from my books back home. I was naive, first-time tourist. While walking around St. Peter Basilica, a photographer approached me to take my photo. I gave him the money for the photo, and he gave me an address where I could go to pick them up, which of course was non-existent. But Rome also reminded me of the theological center of Shiism in Iran. Everywhere I looked were black-clad priests, except that in Italy they were cleaner and more polite. Then I flew to London. I rode in one of the famous London black cabs with its large front lights like eyes lighting up the street looking for passengers. I gave the driver address of a hotel that had been recommended to me in Iran, which was near Trafalgar Square. The large square in the central London filled with pigeons, where demonstrators often gather around Nelson Column to air their grievances. When the taxi pulled in front of the hotel's glitzy lobby that opened onto the corner of Strand Avenue, two tall-dressed men rushed over to the cab, opened my door, and picked up my bags. In Iran, all tall, good-looking men were often government ministers, so I was confused as to why these two were taking my bags. I was worried that they were stealing my luggages. But then I realized they were carrying them for me. I was a long way from dusty bus stops and mules of Near East. At the front desk of the hotel, They wanted to keep my passport as it was required. I refused to give it to them. To get to my room, I rode in a glass elevator, rising higher in it than I ever risen without being accompanied by goats in the mountain around my small hometown. After walking around the huge bathroom in my hotel room a few times, I went to see the main attraction of London as I knew them. The day of my departure from America came rapidly, and I made my way to Southampton. I boarded the ocean liner, the Queen Mary, water lapping against the huge liner's black and red hull, from which rose floors of white cabin, topped by 3 giant tilting chimneys. I was sure there were many more people on this boat than the total population of Nereis. The crossing cost me $50 and took 6 days. I shared a cabin with a roommate. He was a young British man with personality of a playboy. Knowing no one else in the ship, I went around with him. One evening, he flirted with 2 Irish girls. I knew nothing about dating or girls, but one dog holding the hand of one of them, repeating to her the few English words I knew. Another night, I won a costume contest with my traditional white, furry, flat-topped hat that leaned to the right on my head. At the dinner table, I had no idea about the correct silverware etiquette, so I followed the lead of the others. This young man with whom I roomed the Queen Mary went on to find fame and fortune as a television personality was Robin Leach. The YMCA where I was staying in New York City pointed out that though I thought I had applied to Harvard, I had in fact The YMCA where I was staying pointed out that though I thought I had applied to Harvard, I had in fact applied to Howard, a name that sounded identical to my Persian ears. Howard University did not have a nuclear engineering program, a field I had chosen because it seemed so contemporary and cutting edge, even though I had no real idea what it meant. I did not attend Howard since it did not have the program I taught I was interested in pursuing. Instead, I traveled north because I also had been accepted to the language program at St. Michael's College, a Jesuit school in Vermont, which I had planned to attend to improve my English in preparation for full-time university study. I missed my family terribly. The only other foreign students at St. Michael College were 150 Hungarian refugees from the 1956 uprising. The cafeteria was most foreign place of all to a boy from a town without even street lights. There was a spigot from which boundless amount of fresh milk poured out when I depressed the handle. Delighted but confused, I walked out back to see the cows that were dispensing this copious amount of free milk. In Nereis, a small bucket of fresh milk was a treat. Even more so was chicken, and here at this college, all I had to do to get some was walk to the server and stick my plate, whereupon a piece of hot fried chicken appeared. A student laughed at my foreign ways as they watched me pour tea into saucer and slurp it with a lump of sugar between my teeth, which in Iranian custom. The college dean has to inform me that I must not hold hands with a male friend on campus, which though a customary act of friendship in Iran would be misinterpreted and was not socially acceptable in a small American town. I may have missed my true calling of being a stand-up comedian. Some friends and I ventured over to the Improv Comedy Club on the west side of New York, where they proceeded to tell the manager that I was from another country and could tell jokes. The manager got on stage and announced that Jose, that was me, was going to come up next. I got up there and I told few stories and got laughs. The manager wanted me to come back and do sets between the regular comics, but this was not a respectful job for a young Persian man. I even considered becoming an undertaker. The ad said $4 or $5 an hour. No experience necessary. I called the number immediately, and the man who answered said, "Wonderful, come in Monday." I told my landlady that I had good news, that I was getting a new job and that I would be making lots of money. When she learned what the new job was, they responded by saying that I would have to leave her premises immediately if I took up that kind of work. Finally, I swallowed the remainder of my pride and became a dishwasher. I worked in a Greek and Italian restaurant. One establishment was a restaurant and inn in the East Side that was run by an abusive woman who was friendly to the customers but rough on the staff. She had 2 German shepherds, which I had to look after. While I was cleaning the bathrooms and making up beds, I thought with envy about the easy life of those 2 dogs. From the moment I arrived in the United States, I had the feeling of being a foreigner. I was inside the country but outside the society. I had arrived with a few pairs of billowy Alibaba-style pants, canvas underwear made by my mother, and an unsightly large black coat, pistachios, and a hair gel because I feared not finding any in the new country. I even came to dislike my name. My father had named me Hussein, after Imam Hussein, because his name was Baha'i, a name that has caused great difficulty when it came to employment in Iran. Well, he was prejudged by his name. In the United States, though, Hussein sounded Arab and Muslim and marked me as different. So I often use American names like David Mark. Mark in Persian means dead. Later, my marriage certificate listed me as Jimmy Adieh. During my first Thanksgiving, I was invited to the home of an American family whose daughter was a classmate. Following the Persian custom of Ta'aruf, I declined the offers of food, though I was hungry. Persian politeness demanded that an offer be turned down a few times before being accepted, so as not to appear greedy and disrespectful of the other person. But I was in US and my American host took my response at face value. They continued the meal without me while I sat and watched TV, feeling so confused and so hungry that I ate the entire bowl of nuts on the table in front of me, while the family ate the sumptuous Thanksgiving turkey dinner. Even though I was a university student, my English remained at the level of a low-wage restaurant worker, while I was gradually forgetting Persian, my mother tongue. My son would later say I was illiterate in 2 languages. My friends and co-workers were all foreigner, Italian waiters, Greek cooks, Puerto Rican dishwasher, and Persian student. I had a Yugoslavian roommate who was happy just to be working as a busboy in the US, which saved him from poverty he had experienced in his home country. He was enamored of American world. He often asked me what I thought Rockefeller was doing that day. Being a foreigner also meant living in fear of deportation. The nights before I had to present myself at the immigration office with my school records to be able to extend my visa were a sleepless one. The presence of a police cruiser always made me anxious. I had to buy a car when I moved to New Jersey because my school was 3 miles away, so I bought a Chrysler for $100. I rear-ended the car in Holland Tunnel in New York City, and the driver offered me $80 before I could offer him any money. Neither of us wanted to involve the police. I was already in trouble for not having paid the parking ticket, so I figured the other guy must have been worse than me. My license was eventually suspended for 60 days, and a detective came to arrest me. I shared a cell that night with an Italian who told me he was in for rape. Fortunately, friends came to bail me out. Eventually, I find myself in a traffic court in front of a judge, whom I call Your Highness. He answered that Your Honor would do. I plead with him not to suspend my license because I needed it to get to school. A lack of license, I said, would paralyze me. He clarified that he was not paralyzing me, he was penalizing me. The next day, the town paper had a small headline: Hossein Adie from Israel had a choice to come to court to pay his tickets earlier or take an exam. So he picked the lesser of the two evils. He came to court but lost his license. My anxiety about my status was such that I even considered marrying an Italian woman for $500 so that I could get the green card. I was concerned, though, that she might not divorce me, so I did not go through it. I should have gone to Iran to marry my future wife Tahereh, but my fear of not being able to return prevented me. Instead, Tahereh came over in 1968. There was a shortage of doctors in the U.S., so the sponsoring hospital provided her with a green card, a stipend, and an apartment, and I was fortunate to share these benefits. The companionship I found in our marriage banished my loneliness I had lived with since stepping out of the Queen Mary, and Tahereh's straightforwardness and sincerity cleared the confusion that often plagued my mind about the state of my life and the prospect of the future. We were married in my friend Majid's apartment. Majid ran a garage and had a car, which meant to us poor Persian students that he was rich. When Tahereh arrived in the state, Majid took us out for a Middle Eastern dinner and a belly dancing. I think the dancer knew Majid, and she got on the top of a table and made some fancy dancing moves. Out of modesty, Tahereh, who had spent her whole life in a Baha'i family, kept her eyes closed the entire time. Being a foreign student, I had no saving with which to pay for a wedding. I borrowed $200. I bought a $10 fake diamond ring. We invited the member of a spiritual assembly and friends, but could only spend $40 on the whole event. The meal consisted of a turkey and cookies. For our honeymoon, Tahereh and I drove to Washington, D.C., but ran out of money. On our way back, we spent the night in the rented car. Her father sent us the gift of a rock from Iran. I dream of this big, beautiful rock coming from my home country, which would give distinction to my small apartment, a small studio actually. Though I feared the magnificent rock would not fit in the tiny place, I asked Majid to bring his station wagon because a Persian rock could not fit into a small vehicle. We drove out to the airport after I got a notice from Iran Air that the rock had arrived. I walked up to the pickup window and the attendants went to get our big, beautiful rock. But when she returned, she placed a small prayer rock in front of me that easily fit in the shallow counter. It was personal prayer rock for our daily use. I heard about Harlem Preparatory School because of my association with Ed and Ann Carpenters, who were both Baha'is and whom I like and admire greatly. One could not help but feel that way about both of them and be inspired by their vision for young people. My experience as an immigrant trying to eke out a living in a hot and crowded kitchens, and the verification I had whether as a Baha'i in a small Iranian Shia Muslim town made me open to try to understand the struggle of Black Americans against racism and the Jim Crow states. Several of my idealist Iranian colleagues and friends went with me to march on Washington during the summer of '63, became inspired to consider this same kind of movement could start in Iran. I brought to Harlem Prep the fruits of an excellent education I had received in Iran, which I had been traditional and demanding, along with the openness to the spirit of the time and its paradigm, breaking ideas and approaches. When it came to education, I was pragmatic and willing to wholeheartedly support the philosophy of the Prep if it could advance the lives of the young people. My views were influenced by the Baha'i teaching, which emphasized the innate goodness in all human beings and their potential, which could be realized through education. To truly enter the American middle class, we needed to buy a house. I called my mother in Tehran, to whom I had previously sent $5,000 to buy land there as an investment. She went to the realtor and sold the land, but on her way out, her purse containing the cash was stolen by two men on a motorcycle. Despite this setback, we were able to make the down payment on our new first home, a Tudor-style house in decidedly middle to upper middle class neighborhood of Douglaston, Queens, on the border of Long Island. The neighborhood had sections that resembled more the lifty suburb rather than the typical New York City neighborhood. In the background, we had a small pool, and soon our suburban picture was complete with a Labrador and a Great Dane, both of which were driven crazy by our cat. I became a real American homeowner, going so far as to walk these dogs during my evening strolls through the neighborhood. I always stopped to chat with the neighbors, who were gracious and loving toward us, even in 1979, when Iranians were very unpopular in the United States. Tahera created the rhythm of Baha'i life in our home. In addition to taking our children out of school for holidays and going to their school for Ayyam Ha, she trained them in the practices of daily prayer, giving to the fund, and attending 19 days feast, and she read the stories to them about the Baha'i faith. The children regularly participated in a session at Greenacre Baha'i School, which became like a second home to them. Bobby and Linda also benefited greatly from having Tahera's parents there to look after them with such love. We are also fortunate enough as a family to make a pilgrim to the Baha'i shrine in Israel. Tahera made sure that the photo of Abdu'l-Baha was visible in each room and that Baha'i books were placed all over the house. We welcomed many Baha'i guests and friends from diverse backgrounds. She also modeled Baha'i behavior by refraining from backbiting, carrying out her personal spiritual obligation, and being active in Baha'i community life. We taught the faith by opening our home to all people, and our children experienced the oneness of mankind in practice. Our wonderful American neighbors visit us often, and we visit them also. They swam with us in our pool and looked after our dogs when we were away. Our block was a very supportive environment. I was grateful during those years that we could provide a home for my father and give him the joy of spending afternoon on the playground with his grandchildren. Though only in his late 50s, the stress of having lived in Iran under the welter of the day in and day out harassment by Muslims had taken its toll. He had experienced a lifetime of frustration which showed on his face and his body. He seemed preoccupied with the afterlife and often spoke about the glorious of Abha Kingdom, the Baha'i term for the next world. I was also grateful that he had been spared seeing what the Islamic Revolution did to Iran in 1979 and its Baha'i community. Every night he toiled on his memoir of the history of the faith in Neres and of his experiences there. He wrote the same way he chanted, in a Persian that flowed. One evening, after attending feast, he reached the end of his written testimony, signed it, and later that night passed away in his sleep. Along with the hands of a cause, my father had been my leading light as a Baha'i. He was one who had demonstrated resilience in the face of tests, knowledge of the teaching when confronted by ignorance, and dedication to progress of the cause despite persecution. And I was grateful that he passed away in a comfort in my new home, in my new country. Over the course of our lives, like those of many Baha'is of Iran, the Baha'i faith has sustained our souls. The United States of America has given us the opportunity to realize our professional potentials, and the prayers of generations of our families have protected us. Ordain, O Lord, through thy most exalted pen, that which will immortalize our souls in the realm of glory, will perpetuate our name in thy kingdom, and safeguard our lives in the treasures of the protection, and our body in the stronghold of thy inviolable fastness.